Now on to the next panel, which will be exploring the state of supply path optimization and who can benefit from focusing on the path an advert takes to inventory supply. Moderated by Daniel Knapp, IAB Europe's chief economist, in his second appearance. And again, he's probably back, I hope he's back, with an infamous Zoom background, which apparently is being mentioned widely on Twitter. Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you very much, David. I think Zoom backgrounds are a fantastic way to spice things up. I got this one here because I got the laundry drying behind me, so it's a matter of necessity. I'm extremely grateful to the previous panel for setting up the discussion so fantastically well for the acronym that we are going to talk about next, SPO, or Supply Path Optimization. We've heard about transparency, and we've heard about the opacity of the ecosystem, and I think Emily from the BBC really put it very well when she said, we've made things more complicated than they should be. And Steve Wing from Rubicon, I think, very rightly said that we've seen an explosion of complexity, not necessarily because we wanted things to be this complex, but because we've created unintended consequences for our action. But I think also that the industry kind of thrives and kind of celebrates, or has celebrated, the complexity inherent in programmatic quite a bit. I mean, if you think about the classic programmatic pilgrimage every year to Mexico, we love to talk in acronyms. We love to thrive in complexity because it shows how important technological solutions are. Yet, we've also seen, and I think any ecosystem, any industry that has grown organically through technology is seeing this. Complexity everywhere, lack of standards, a multitude of vendors that need to talk to each other, etc. When we look at ways of making the programmatic world simpler, such as header bidding, when we look at things like more SSPs facilitating demands for publishers, these were great things, but they also created new complex consequences, like DSPs needed to look at more data. We saw the concept of QPS, queries per second, suddenly become really an economic concern for many parties in the industry. So we've come up with either technological or human-based solutions to really drill more deeply into the programmatic supply path to foster transparency, as in the previous panel, but also to optimize, to change things. And before I introduce my stellar panel, I would just like to share briefly one slide with you to illustrate this complexity. What you can see on this screen here are just a couple of supply paths. Here, having worked with a publisher, we looked at the SSP log level data, and just from an SSP perspective, looked back at who's buying, what paths are these companies choosing. And you can see how complex things are. And this is just a snapshot, a single snapshot. These things evolve over time constantly. So we have to think, are these paths all viable? Should we streamline the industry? Should we learn from the logistics industry and others to figure out what is the best path from demand and supply, and how could that look like? And this is something that we would like to discuss in the panel right now. So Marie-Claire, if you can put up the panel slides to introduce the panelists, I will. Wonderful. I'll introduce the stellar team. I'm really thrilled that we got such a kind of diverse set of industry participants here. Lisa from Pubmatic, tech player, Simon from Bloomberg, publisher, Tom from agency, Shane, again, tech, IP and web, and Christoph also from a very different perspective, also tech. So we've got lots of stellar views on what supply path optimization is, how it looks like, how it's going to evolve. And thank you all for joining us. And let's start with a quick introduction of who everyone is, and also with a particular emphasis on why are you interested in SPO. Lisa, would you like to start?
Yeah, hi, I'm Lisa Kalijny. I run demand for EMEA at Pubmatic, which is an omni-channel SSP. I think SPO is something that has been an acronym in our lives for probably about the past 2 or 3 years. So an exciting time to talk about it and work closer with the agencies and buyers.
Thanks.
My name is Simon Baker, and I head up programmatic for Bloomberg Media in Europe, Middle East and Africa. Just noticed I must have the only person with the shortest hair before coronavirus rather than now in that picture. Why is SPO so important for us? I think it's about transparency, and it's about unblocking the pipes. It's understanding what's going on and who are the players, and more importantly, what commissions and fees are being taken.
Hey everybody, I'm Tom from OMG, Head of Programmatic Development over there, looking at the features and capabilities that we need to develop as a group in programmatic and to fill those strengths quickly. SPO for us is performing a role that I believe agencies have done since the dawn of time, which is trying to get the inventory and the audiences that our advertisers are looking for at the most efficient and best possible price. So that might see me buying media from Simon through Lisa's connection, and I just want to optimize that as much as possible.
Thanks, Shane.
Hi everybody, I'm Shane from Icon Web. We are a global leader in smart programmatic infrastructure and media trading technology. We facilitate more than 4,000 trading connections across more than 300 DSPs and SSPs. So we have a unique perspective on many of the supply paths that that buyers are taking today.
And lastly, Christoph.
Hi, my name is Christoph Lies. I work at Yieldbird. Yieldbird is a company that simply allows publishers to make most out of the programmatic ecosystem. My team is responsible for managing the programmatic campaigns and also for selling the inventory to other buyers using deals. And the SPO, from our perspective, is simply a way to make all the transactions that we are involved in as easy and as fast as possible.
Thank you all. And you already started to define SPO, and that's really the first question to the audience. SPO with 3 letters, so many meanings. We've seen concepts like ads.txt, we've seen supply chain object, sellers.json, we got files, we got standards. What really is SPO? Do we have a unified definition of that across the industry, or how does it vary? Lisa, what do you think?
I don't know if there's, I think, the unified definition of it, but I think the way that we really simplify and explain it, and I think it's a Digiday actually analogy, is that think of it as a bazaar. So you're in Istanbul, you go to the Grand Bazaar and you're looking at all the textile vendors and you're seeing that a lot of them have all of the same fabrics. Now, as a tourist, you don't know the price, you don't know the cost of things, you don't know who's got the best quality and who's got the closest path to the actual fabric makers. Now, as a local, you would go into that bazaar, you know who everyone is, you go to your go-to person and you pay, you know exactly what you're going to pay for, and you pick up that best fabric. So I think SPO is exactly like that. It's getting that supply from the closest path to the publisher and looking at it from an efficiency perspective. So you, as Tom, is paying the best price.
Anyone else on board with the bizarre metaphor, Tom, as an agency? How do you see it?
So for us, yeah, I would say the analogy of a bazaar is a good one. I think also if you think back to a world before places like Money Supermarket, where you could perform price comparison and make sure that you didn't have that buyer's remorse after paying for your car insurance and thinking, oh, if only I'd gone through a different provider, I could have got exactly the same cover for a better price. And it's exactly as Lisa describes. It comes down to you know, the relationship with Simon's inventory. Simon has a number of different SSPs that he might work with that you can see displayed in one of the most beautiful and tidy ads.txt files I've ever seen in my life. So I implore you all to head to bloomberg.com/ads.txt and check that out for yourself. But I'm sorry to say that not every ads.txt file is as beautifully displayed as that. We've already kind of talked about the ads.txt initiative a little bit today. What we found as an agency when we created our own crawlers and kind of assessed the information available to us when ads.txt did proliferate across the suppliers we work with was that publishers like Simon were working with up to 28 different SSPs as resellers and 14 different suppliers as direct, which Daniel, your wonderful graph depicts beautifully as well. And armed with that information, we decided that not every single one of those people representing that inventory would be the most efficient path to supply every single time. So we see it as our job as agencies helping advertisers to optimize that path to supply.
Shane, your company does a lot of the kind of plumbing and piping in the background of the industry. So I think you might have a unique perspective to understand, where did this SPO really come from? Why are we talking about it now?
Sure. So I think just to echo Tom's sentiment, we think of SPO today mainly in terms of checking off some sort of checkboxes and validating the reality of what you think is your supply path to a publisher audience. I think at a very high level, though, SPO is a catch-all term really for ensuring that as a media buyer, you can sort of realize your business goals in the most efficient way possible to that desired supplier audience. Originally, the need for SPO emerged really to address two main issues that were plaguing the demand side of the RTB ecosystem. The first being a rapid rise in bid duplication, which resulted mainly from the rise of header bidding and its adoption by publishers. And the second issue then being the sort of the growing issue really of, if you like, unfair or inconsistent auction dynamics within RTB auction. And just the lack of transparency that you had around those. So these are really practices performed by certain sort of inter-principal platforms in the ecosystem, mainly SSPs or exchanges, on the way to that publisher audience or on the way to sort of receiving that bid request or impression.
If I might just jump in, you mentioned the term transparency. For the sake of our audience, would you guys see SPO as a subset of transparency, like discussed in the second panel, or is it more than just transparency?
So I think SPO is impossible without transparency. So good practice SPO, you need to actually have access to the data points in order to perform SPO, whether that's on a manual basis or on a more sort of machine-led basis using advanced techniques around machine learning and so on. But absolutely, the minimum requirement for good practice SPO is transparency, so that you can actually get access to the data points.
Fantastic. And Simon, I mean, we've already heard about your Marie Kondoed ads.txt, and one acronym often doesn't come alone, but with a second one, and there's something called DPO. Demand preference optimization. So that's the cousin of SPO, as some call it, the publisher side of SPO. So if we think about, we've talked to the buy side currently, representatives from the buy side, what does SPO mean, or DPO mean to you as a publisher?
So we're focused on DPO. So just to back it up, because we dearly love the three-letter acronym in this industry. So it's a total reverse of SPO. So we're really looking to understand how impressions are being bought, rather than Tom's probably looking more from how they're being sold. So we're looking at this the other way around. So kind of what does that really mean? So we're looking at a few things from our SSP partners. So some examples would be, we would be looking at win rates. What's the win rate for SSPX over SSPY? We'll be looking at response times. Latency comes into this, fast page loads. That's all part of DPO as well. It's not just the commercial side. Ad quality. Ad quality is a big play here. What does ad quality look like? It looks like a couple of things. It looks at advertisers. It looks at the categories, and it also looks at the messaging, which is obviously very relevant at the moment. And then you kind of start taking a little deeper dig, and then you kind of start getting into some of the granular payment terms. So, you know, whether it's 30, 60, 90 days. And then particularly, unfortunately, kind of in this current climate, which is quite topical, is credit history. You know, are the people we're working with, are the buyers we're working with able to pay their bills at the end of the day? Because none of us want to be left with bad debts. Some great initiatives going on in the marketplace at the moment. I have to call out this one because Lisa's looking at me. Pubmatic, for example, have brought forward their payment terms for Q2, which I think is a brilliant initiative around stuff like this, bringing more liquidity into the market. Just if I can flip back for a second, just while I've got the microphone on SPO. So from where we sit on the publisher side, SPO is starting to feel like a new name for unique demand. Okay, that's how it's starting to feel. Every SSP that's coming to us says you have to work for us for this reason. So if we take an example, so Index are quite heavily tied up with Rubicon at the moment. So from a publisher perspective, it's going to be a very brave publisher that won't have a conversation with Index. You know, are you really not going to work with Group M globally? The answer is probably no. So some of these conversations put certain SSPs in very, very strong positions. And then my last comment is SPO, DPO, they're all really, really good initiatives. But what worries me, and maybe I've jumped a few questions, is kind of we're digging tunnels from opposite ends here. And Tom, I hope we're going to meet in the middle here. I'm sure we are, but there is a concern that we're coming at this from different directions.
Well, it's all about you know, quality audiences and quality inventory, which you've got in spades, Simon. So you don't need to worry about that. It's just making sure that everybody in the chain between and as a middleman ourselves, you know, ultimately it's about our advertisers and, you know, you guys, the publisher, and we've heard that reiterated a number of the times today. It's about making sure that chain is as efficient as possible and that everybody in it is adding value, not just detracting.
If we're just going to sum up on the...
I would also, hold on, Daniel, can I just add something to that? Because I think it's about meeting in the middle, but I'd also say, Simon, I think that it's about partnership and having the opportunity to have that relationship with not just Tom, but also the SSP and the DSP, and making sure that everyone is working together to make sure that not only Tom's needs are met, but also yours as the publisher. Because if everyone has the agreed set of KPIs, then everyone knows exactly what's at stake and how they can work better together.
I think from all the answers so far, and Christoph, I'm really keen to hear your point of view as well in a second. Just to summarize, when we try to define what SPO is, we saw it from the buy side, from the sales side. We've talked about the paths and the lengths of the path, but then also we talked about contract terms. So it seems to me that they're both technical challenges, but also market economic challenges coming together under this umbrella term of SPO. And Christoph, you help publishers monetize better, and insights are a key component in what you deliver. How are you helping with SPO? What kind of decision support are you providing?
Well, I believe that SPO was in place even long before the term SPO was coined. So the buyers were trying to get the best impressions for the lowest price without the hassle that is generated by some parties that buy inventory in bulk and sell it on the market, claiming that they are doing it on the behalf of the publisher. And the easiest approach that can be done manually that we found so far was just to use private dealers or PMPs. It's a very simple case of the buyer being in touch with, for example, Simon, yeah, and telling Simon that I need to buy a specific amount of impressions, and I'm using this particular DSP, and then Simon creates a deal for me, and in this way I can just go directly from my DSP to his SSP and then buy the impressions this way, getting additional transparency on top of that, getting additional brand safety because I know the content, I know where my ads are going to be displayed, and so on and so forth. So the best manual solution that we found so far, and we are utilizing it very heavily with our publishers, is those deals that we create for the buyers. The deals are pretty easy to manage. They, of course, don't solve all the issues that are on the market. The deals sometimes don't work, and we have to troubleshoot them. But at the end of the day, we found that the deals are the best manual solution. Well, relying on manual solutions on the market when there is a billion transactions every hour is not the best way to approach it, but it might be the only solution if we need to get rid of almost all the parties that are involved in the process. So this would be my suggestion.
Mm-hmm. So I think we've established kind of what SPO is, and we've touched on some of the issues that SPO is designed to tackle. But let's do that a bit more systematically. What problems is SPO designed to solve? And we've got a question in the audience which relates to that, which is, can you elaborate a bit on the kind of inconsistent auction dynamics? So is there one problem, like the length of the chain, that we're trying to solve? Is it just intransparency, or what's the whole portfolio of things that SPO can and should address? Lisa, what do you think?
Just looking at this poll, I mean, the easy way is to go all of the above, but just thinking through it, I think that it's not just about the regulators and not just about government pushing us. I think it's the really more demand for transparency. I think over the past probably year and a half, as we've worked closer with the agencies, we hear from them is that, you know, we've spent all this time building relationships with the DSPs, but we haven't really dedicated the time to build the relationships with the SSPs and really understand capabilities and understand the benefits of working closer together. So I think that in that building that relationship with the SSPs, it's them realizing that, you know, I can ask for the tools that are necessary for me to do my job quickly and easily. So I always say is help us help you. Like we're all here to make, you know, the publisher's life easier, but also the buyer side easier. So how do we do this together?
We got a quick poll up. Please feel free to vote exactly on that question. What has driven the demand for SPO? Tom, from an agency perspective, are your clients approaching you to say, we want to do SPO? Is that something you are selling them, or how do you talk about that in your day-to-day job?
No, our clients are not rushing to use another three-letter acronym in relation to programmatic. That won't surprise anybody. No, agencies, advertisers task agencies with you know, getting the best possible media placements for them at the best possible price. You'll hear a lot earlier about identity and kind of the consolidation that's happening there. You know, the consolidation that we heard and the simplifying of complexity that we heard about in the previous panel as well. SPO is, you know, for us, does have a common thread through that, with our advertisers coming to us and saying, can you make the supply chain simpler, more effective and more efficient? One of our major clients, in fact, you know, P&G, Mark Pritchard, you know, probably uttered the most famous kind of call to arms on this when he talks about the murky media supply chain, you know, 2 or 3 years ago now, and really set in place a chain of events that leads up to agencies like ourselves building relationships with SSPs like Lisa's, as she described. So spending much more time with SSPs, and that necessitated some work on our side, because if you open up DSPs today, you can see that there are 350 exchanges and sub-exchanges available to you to buy from, and we can't possibly have relationships with every single one of them to the degree that we would like. So it's really important to have you know, Simon's endorsement as a publisher for who he feels is worth working with. That's who, you know, has a lot of power here. And it's also important to have people like Lisa doing a lot to work with us, you know, someone to speak to at the end of the phone, for want of a better analogy, to then have that relationship with and develop that capability on our side.
And what you mentioned kind of really fits well with the poll results which just got in. So when we look at what has driven the demand for SPO, one of the main things, 36% of respondents said the demand for transparency. Others, 10%, said change in auction dynamics. So that seems to be an issue. And others, even 6%, not many, said pressure from regulators. So it seems to be some kind of anticipatory move by the industry, and seems to be linked to transparency to show how the industry functions. And 47% said all of the above. So many reasons for SPO. And Tom, you mentioned the advertiser wants the best inventory for the cheapest price. So SPO is some kind of optimization. What does that mean? Let's say, Simon, from a publisher perspective. We said all of the parties here in this panel are interested in doing SPO, but are we pulling all on the same string? And if someone, if the buy side is optimizing the best path to the inventory from the buy side, is that also the best path for the publisher, or are SPO and DPO kind of competing in some kind of algorithmic battle for price? So is the kind of yield management 2.0?
Yeah, I mean, this is a personal perspective. I don't like the idea that there's two different ways of doing this. I don't think we're all pulling in the same direction. And Lisa, I wrote down "You're better together." I think that should be our slogan on this. I like that. We should use that. So it's no surprise that any buyer, and it's just easy to pick on Tom because he's there. You want to access our inventory for the cheapest possible price. Breaking news, like, we're fine with that. I know that's what you're trying to do. But, but as soon as we bring this magic word transparency and understanding into the equation, and we understand where some of these fees and kind of like these reselling of inventories going, guess what? It means we end up with more inventory. It means that we get a slightly higher eCPM. It means that you can probably bid at lower prices. I don't have a massive problem with that. It's the lack of understanding and a lack of clarity that's currently in the marketplace, especially from where we sit, is that we don't understand everything that's going on.
And that brings us really to the point, who should be doing SPO? We see on the one hand, we can't really understand what's going on because there's so much complexity. We mentioned the hundreds of different vendors involved, which just cognitively can't be processed by any human being as saying what's better, what's worse. So it needs some kind of technology. At the same time, we stressed also how important relationships are, the ability to pick up the phone and to get transparency and accountability that way. We've talked about in the beginning about QPS, a very technical thing again. So when we see who does SPO, is that a technological fix? Does that mean a human analyst trawls through an ad.txt, so does the JSON? Or does it mean more informed conversations between partners during quarterly business reviews and so forth?
I mean, I would say, I think that we're better together, Simon. I'm into it. Let's definitely use that. But I think that the IAB put together the supply chain transparency guide, and I think that's the perfect starting point. So I don't think it's just about the SSP doing SPO or the publisher. I think it's about everyone understanding and having that level of education. So I often go back to using education as an important piece of the programmatic puzzle, because what you don't know, you don't understand, and what you don't understand, you think is murky. And I think that if you're able to give that level of transparency, both to the agency, the brand, and the publisher, it makes everyone's life easier. So it's not necessarily a race to the bottom. It's understanding how much is actually getting to Simon. So it's about not only paying the lowest price, as Tom cares about, but also understanding that we're all businesses. We're all in it to, make sure that we're profitable, but also provide a service, and making sure that that service not only helps the publishers that we're working with, but also the advertisers as well, and that we create a healthier and more holistic ecosystem.
Yeah, I think before I get portrayed as the villain of the piece, which also happened in the pre-call, so I should have expected it on the panel as well. But by no means is it a race to the bottom at all. The current situation focuses the mind, as Emily mentioned so well, talked about so well on the previous panel. And the BBC, a fantastic publisher as well, taking part in today, talking about the need for quality journalism, and we kind of wholly support that. We've been less showy than some of the other holding groups about our kind of own attempts to work with advertisers and our traders on the whole negative keyword COVID-19 fandango as well, because I heard another holding group mentioned before, we've done that piece. It's sort of typical of us. We don't really talk about it too much, but definitely in the background working to make that happen. We care about the ecosystem. SPO is about caring about the ecosystem. It's you know, when waste and inefficiency are cut out, advertising campaigns work harder, and clients come back and invest more. You know, that's ultimately the benefit of trust, and you know, growing the whole pie for everybody. So, supply path optimization is being a responsible buyer. The other thing that I wouldn't make any apology for is that supply path optimization. I'll take the opportunity because we've had a good 2 years with this, building technology and things like that. So it's time for me to use this platform with IAB Europe to hand this over to the wider market. There are smart buyers out there using the information available to them and making gains, and you can gain an unfair competitive advantage from doing supply path optimization. That I recommend everybody on this call today and listening in today start doing for their own benefit. So yeah, so I would say you know, beat the average buyer out there and take advantage of the tools available to you to do this.
We're getting a lot of questions about the business of SPO, and we talked about a shorter chain, and the questions also relate to less amount of players. So we got one question here: will publishers need SSPs in the future? Isn't the market working hard to skip at least one of the letters in the acronym, 1D or 1S? And we see, if we look at the industry news, we see now privileged relationships between some agencies and SSPs. We're seeing some DSPs building direct relationships with publishers. How do these kind of industry moves affect the role of SPO and the value that each of the market participants that we have today brings to the table? Who would like to take that audience question?
I mean, I'm happy to answer that. I would give Simon the first chance, but I think that the concept that SSPs are going away is about 5 to 6 years old. I think that was a chat on Twitter that long ago. So appreciate somebody trying to bring it back. But as we've seen the shift from walled gardens, and I think people wanting to move away from said walled gardens because they're not able to get things like transparency and holistic auctions and things like that. I personally don't see the role of an SSP going away, because we need also the independent SSP to provide you with more kind of concrete information. And I think it all goes back to transparency. From what I've heard from most holding companies is that the likes of said walled gardens aren't really willing to provide that transparency. So how do we as an ecosystem make sure that we demand it from everyone? And what do we do as, you know, the IAB or the governing body to really demand that?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Lisa, just in relation to walled gardens. If we remember sort of the rise of header bidding in 2015, or maybe even slightly earlier in some cases, it was driven primarily by suboptimal ad server setups and the dominance, I guess, of certain walled gardens. And I think the clue is in the name for SPO. So, you know, it is in essence optimizing campaigns on the buy side for the most part. And it's been around for a long time in under a different guise, simply optimizing how line items, how creatives reached their final destination. So consumers on publisher pages. On the question of will SSPs go away, I think I would agree with you, Lisa. You know, as long as an SSP is adding value, they perform a very valuable function today on behalf of publishers, and that goes also for any hop along the supply chain. As long as there is you know, sort of obvious value being created by that participant in the supply chain, then you know there's a role to play for them. Coming back to specifically to sort of SPO and how relates to the, I guess that dynamic. You know, there are different categories within this optimization, if you like. For us, one of the major things we try to sort of combat once the sort of the number of hops along the supply chain was clearly increasing through duplication from header bidding, was to to sort of explore the deltas that we were beginning to see between first and second price auction environments, and really repair some of the damage that was being done to buy-side budgets by that dynamic. We call that product internally, or that service, OPD, or optimal price discovery, and it's essentially, you know, a sort of a micro A/B testing approach at very high scale. In some cases, we'd seen as high as 30% reduction in media cost, if, of course, that is your primary optimization goal as a buyer. Separately, then, so SPO can involve, you know, introducing additional intelligence somewhere in the supply chain to enrich or pre-filter a bid stream before it even reaches a DSP. For us, we call that practice traffic shaping, and it's typically executed with tech that allows you sort of to interrogate in real time the bid request as it comes through, identify, for example, if there's a delay in the response time, which may indicate, for example, it's being resold. You know, so there's very many different categories of SPO that you can apply on the supply chain.
Let's flip it quickly to DPO. We've got some questions on there as well. And one of the beauties, of course, about the programmatic, particularly the open market, was the democratization of access, the democratization of demand and of supply. And here's a question from an anonymous attendee that's asking about DPO. Isn't just if the publisher makes a decision which SSP they want to prioritize, don't they just create a more fragmented market for buyers again? Isn't it just like progressing to the old waterfall model? Simon and Christoph, what do you guys think about that?
Yes, I'll answer that, and then I'll just cover the other question at the same time. Lisa's right. This SSP DSP has been going on for ages about what one's going away, which adds more value. I don't want to oversimplify things, but sometimes you make life so complicated. So back to my original point, we just need to get closer as a publisher to people with unique demands. You know, whether it's an SSP, whether it's an ad network, whether it's a DSP, whoever it is, our job is to create unique demand. The effort and energy, resource and time that is taken internally to onboard a new partner is horrific. We have to put together business cases, we have to go to committees, we have to go through numerous hoops. So to make the wrong decision at the start, onboarding a partner is the worst possible thing. So I'm going to just refer back to when Index and Group N start making these connections, it makes it so hard for us not to have conversations with them. So that's how I would answer that question.
Well, from our perspective, I would say that we just have to follow the market trends. Well, a couple of years ago, when the header bidding was implemented and when it gained popularity, some issues arose that eventually led to the SPO being used at all, right? So some issues were created, and the SSPs had to, the DSPs had to deal with a lot of more impressions, a lot of more ad requests, and at the end of the day, we had to deal with it somehow. So from this perspective, I would say that we just have to do whatever is necessary. Why we did try to work with the header bidding in the first place? Because there was some unique demand, like just Simon mentioned, that there was a unique demand from one of the DSPs that worked better with a specific SSP. So to make it a level playing field, we needed to allow this SSP to be involved in the auction at the same level as for the other SSPs and as the Google's default ad exchange that's implemented in the Google's ad manager, which is very commonly used as the ad server. So this was the reason why we had to just move from the waterfall to the header bidding. And now going back to the waterfall is not very reasonable. I would rather think about the SSPs working more closely with the for example, Google in this case, in the ad manager's case, well, moving from the header bidding to the open bidding, that's kind of a header bidding, but done server to server, means that some of the issues might be resolved. Like Lisa said, I believe that we are not going to get rid of the SSPs, but we might see a case of smaller SSPs being acquired or joining efforts because 350 ad exchanges on the market is, from my perspective, way too much of them to be even able to grasp them all, right? So yeah, I believe that we're not going to go away from the header bidding in the foreseeable future, but some exceptions from the general rule might be needed to make it easier for all of us. And Lisa mentioned that when are we all going to implement the SPO or DPO? I believe that we are going to do it whenever all the parties that are involved on the programmatic ecosystem understand that this is the only way to go. Because at the end of the day, we are all benefiting from the transactions. The publishers, the buyers, the agencies, and we are all trying to keep the advertiser as happy as possible for the minimum price, of course, from the perspective of the agency, but also just cutting the chain and making it shorter also means that we are able to get better CPMs, but for each ad request that's generated on the page, because some of the impressions might not be lost in the process. So I believe that we should be looking at this whole process, this whole ecosystem holistically. And at the end of the day, we all want to make the advertiser, the brand, happy.
Right. So we got a lot of questions also around the idea of cost. I mean, we know we are in an ecosystem that is complex, that has been inefficient, that is becoming more efficient through the use of technology, through use of expertise. But if we take out the human costs of human analysts or experts for a second, we know there are a lot of fixed and technical costs being incurred throughout the value chain. We've got one question here that goes back to the notion of QPS, which is asking, would the transparency of QPS cost help publishers and advertisers to understand the impact that inefficiency has on the ecosystem? And then who should pay for that? So there seems to be a question here about showing more sources of inefficiency and then figuring out who pays for that. And Shane, can I play that to you? Because you mentioned some products before that you have available, which I assume also not for free.
Yeah, sure. I mean, on that question specifically, it's a great question because I think ultimately, buyer allocation of budget will always be the single most important factor in the long run, just to understand how our supply chain is impacted. And it's important to understand what the buyer's sort of end goal is. So cheapest impression, yes, it's a relatively straightforward need to satisfy. And usually, you can drive down the cost by either exploiting that delta I mentioned in certain hops along the supply chain through machine learning based sort of approaches to really eliminate non-transparent practices within auction dynamics. So if there are hops that don't ostensibly add value, you can just simply remove them. It's not always the case though that removing the number of hops, it's not always as simple as removing hops to get a better result as a buyer. So lowering CPA is a good example of where choosing the correct sort of supply path is not necessarily obvious. So it turns out critical values here are usually conversion rate of the publisher where ads are showing up, combined with using hops along the way that use simple first price auction logic or sort of simple pass-through logic. So I think it's, as a buyer, it really depends on what your goals are. I think generally for a lot of practices, buyers will look for a clean path where a first price or a simple pass-through logic is what is being used.
We're coming up to the...
Just to add, sorry, can I just add to that? I think that we really love to overcomplicate things. And I think that there's an easy way to do all of this, and being transparent and kind of helping with the education process of it all would help the buyers. Because I think that what Shane is saying, I completely understand, but going to the complexities of it, I think anyone on Tom's team would look at us quite confused. So I think it's about really making sure that we as an industry are able to make what's a complex issue very, very simple and easy to understand. And I think that the more we can be transparent about things like QPS and what that costs a DSP and how that relates to everyone else in the ecosystem, the easier it is. And whether it's a chart or something that's just kind of an easier concept to understand would be helpful. And I think you get back to kind of understanding the value that everyone brings in this chain.
So I actually get ridiculed in my team for bringing up QPS. It's sort of, that's when they start making the geeky glasses at me and mocking me and my team. But I do care about the things that it impacts on Simon's side that I think you were talking about earlier, like in terms of page load and his ability to monetize his inventory, and for the ability for us to reach his audiences, because that can have an impact on all kinds of things like viewability. And of course, we want advertisers, more of advertisers' money to go to authenticated sellers of Simon's inventory, and less of it to fall prey to terrible things like ad fraud and stuff like that. So yeah, we appreciate that there's kind of a whole degree of complexity with it, but then there's a massive amount of kind of benefit if everybody can help each other understand and find the optimal path.
So do we think SPO is here to stay? And we're speaking about this very complex market, but it's mainly the OMP display market. Do we think it's going to here to stay if that OMP display market changes, and can and should be applied to other forms of media or programmatic transaction types?
Yeah, I think that. Go ahead, Tom.
No, sorry, I was just going to say this. I think it becomes even more important when the stakes are higher. So I'm aware that what Simon was talking about in terms of onboarding a new supplier is a fantastic risk on his side. That means that he's going to look to monetize his inventory for the best possible price, but he's got to be careful about who he works with. The same exists on our side as well. Onboarding a new supplier from our side is now a multi-step process. You can imagine with the amount that we vet any tech partner we work with these days. It's a sort of huge undertaking in terms of time and resource. So then when you go into the world of like TV and video and the kind of budgets that are at stake there, the importance of supply path optimization as the industry continues to kind of mature into those markets and those channels just becomes even more important, because the sums in play can be so much higher.
See, from my perspective, Tom, listening to you say that, that's something where we can straight away work closer together, because we make very independent decisions. We make decisions on onboarding X piece of technology over Y technology. I can't remember ever picking up the phone and speaking to an agency person properly about it. So that would be a really nice way of connecting the two together.
I'm here for you, Simon.
That's all I wanted to hear.
Yeah, I think that the evolution of SPO, I think it's just going to continue to evolve as the industry evolves. So I think that we're fortunate that our industry moves very quickly. And I think that as we see learnings from either other industries or other markets, we're able to evaluate and quickly accommodate. And I think being nimble is really what's going to be what helps keep us surviving through all of this, and back to we're better together.
Okay, on that positive note, and we're out of time. Thank you so much for your contributions. Thank you for your perspectives. Dear audience, thank you for your questions. There are quite a few we weren't able to go through yet, but they won't be left unanswered. Thank you very much again, and I'll pass back to our fantastic host, David Goddard. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And I assume I'm not on mute this time. So all good. Fabulous. And thank you all to the panel as well. I'm sure many will use the knowledge you shared to find their own path to success. Please excuse the pun. But it was a really good panel, really complex subject, well debated. And there are definitely things to be thought of on both sides of the ecosystem from the content you shared. And with that, I recommend keeping your eyes peeled for IAB Europe's Programmatic Trading Committee's guide on SPO that is planned for release later in the year. So keep your eyes peeled. Q3, it's chalked 4, so look out for that release next quarter.